sang a couple of songs there at the start. One of the lines in the song is, "Open up my eyes in wonder." Open up my eyes in wonder. And then the other song that we sang is, "Open the eyes of my heart." Open the eyes of my heart. And I want to ask you the question today, can you see him? I don't know if I've preached this before. I've been looking at this all week, and just mulling around a few ideas in my head. And the more that I kind of looked at it, I thought, have I preached this before? Or have I preached it? Or has it been ideas in my head from before? Was it something that I wrote down? And I didn't want to preach something that I preached before, but then I thought, you know what? This is what's on me at the minute. So regardless of whether I preached it before or not, we're just going to go ahead with it. And I just want to ask you the question today, can you see him? In John chapter 20, after the death and the resurrection of Jesus, Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb to look for the body of Jesus, to in some way embalm the body of Jesus, because they hadn't had a chance, they hadn't had an opportunity because of timing to properly embalm the body of Jesus, to go through the rituals that the Jewish people would have went through in the embalming of the body with the spices and stuff like that there, and wrapping it up to prepare it for burial. And so she goes, and a number of them go on what we call Easter Sunday, on the Sunday morning, to hopefully get the stone rolled away and to go into the tomb to embalm the body of Jesus. And we know the story of how that whenever they approach the tomb, whenever they look into the tomb, that the body's not there, the stone's rolled away, and Jesus isn't there. And Mary Magdalene, we're told in John chapter 20, if we pick it up from verse 11, says, Mary stood outside the tomb crying, and she wept. And as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said. "I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" And thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him, and she cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Can you see him? A number of years ago, probably about 4 years ago now, I got these glasses. I've needed glasses for a very long time, but I refused to get them. I refused to go to the opticians for a couple of different reasons. Number one, for me to phone in to make an appointment for something, I find I can't be bothered. And then to actually go and fulfill that appointment, even less bothered. And so to go through the practice of having to phone an optician to make an appointment, to go to the opticians to get my eyes tested, and I thought, well, I can see anyway, things might be a little bit blurry. Sometimes I thought it was the fault of the TV. Whenever you're watching Sky News and you've got the ticker tape along the bottom, or Sky Sports News, and you've got all the breaking news at the bottom. Manchester United are about to ruin the career of another 18-year-old, and you're trying to read it, and you think it's a TV, and yeah, there's something up with the TV, so you'll go and you'll buy a new TV, and you get the new TV hung up on the wall, and yeah, that TV's just as bad. That TV's just as bad as the first one that we had. And eventually I got to see an optician, and he said, "I've got astigmatism, and I really, really need to get glasses." And I remember going to pick up the glasses from the guy just around the corner. And the very first day that I picked these up and I put them on, I started to shout in the shop. I had Eli with me, my youngest, and I started to shout in the shop because I could see everything became a lot more clearer than what it currently was, and I realized what I was missing out on. I realized the value and the importance of having these glasses. And I looked at the shops across the street, and I'm like, wow, you can actually, and I was looking up at the mountains, and I knew that the mountains were green, I knew that the mountains had trees, but I was actually able to see the trees. I was able to see the definition of the trees, and I realized the value of having these glasses, that I could see something. So even today, if I take these off, then what happens is things kind of, I can see, that there's people here, but it's a little bit blurry. And so the problem is, if I take these off, you might well be in the room, and I might see you, but the chances are I won't recognize you. I'll know that there's someone there, but because there's a lack of definition, then I won't know who it is until I put these glasses on, and then I realize, I know who that is. I see you. And sometimes what I've got to do, because I still play football a few times a week, and I've got to take the glasses off to try and get the eyes adjusted to the players I'm about to play with. Not that I pass the ball, but, you can't play football and wear glasses at the same time. And so I've got to get the eyes adjusted, and so I'll maybe come downstairs, I'll be walking through the coffee shop with no glasses, and I'm squinting because I'm trying to see who's in the coffee shop, and I don't want to miss anybody by. But then if I've got these on, then there's definition, and I'm able to see a lot more clearly. And sometimes that can be us with Jesus. We need to put our Jesus glasses on, because sometimes Jesus can be right in front of us, but we don't recognize him. Sometimes Jesus can be standing right in front of you, in the middle of your mess, in the middle of your circumstances, in the middle of the stuff that would seek to confront you and drag you down. Jesus will also be there, but we fail to recognize him. Can you see him? In other words, do you recognize him? Do you recognize that he's there? Do you recognize that he is with you? You see, it's one thing to see him, but it's another thing to recognize him. Mary saw him, but didn't recognize him. Thought he was the gardener. Can you see him? In other words, do you recognize him in the middle of everything that you're going through? Do you recognize him in the middle of your mess? Can you see him? The disciples were very often like this, where they struggled to understand or to see him. In Matthew chapter 14, the disciples are caught in a storm. This is just after the feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus sends his disciples on ahead of him. He puts them into a boat, and they go onto the Sea of Galilee. But we're told in the story how that a storm comes against them, and Jesus sees them from the mountaintop struggling against the wind and the waves. And so Jesus walks out to them in the middle of their storm. Jesus goes to them. There's a story in that. There's a teaching in that. How that in the middle of our storm, Jesus will come to us. Wherever we are at, Jesus will come to us. And so Jesus walks on water towards the disciples who are struggling within the storm. They're struggling in the boat. They see him, but they don't recognize him because they think it's a ghost. They begin to shout at each other, "It's a ghost, it's a ghost." And then eventually Jesus calls out and says, "No, it's me." And even then they still struggle. And Peter has this amazing idea. You know what, boys? I've got this. Everybody just relax. I know how we can figure out if this is a ghost or if it's really Jesus. I know what to do here. I know how to get the answer here. Boys, just relax. I've got this. Okay, if it's really you, then call me out onto the water. What an idea. Well, of all the ideas to come up with, this is Peter's idea. To go walking on water with Jesus. What if it really was a ghost? I'm sinking to the bottom. Yeah, boys, it's a ghost. Go on without me. They've seen him, but they didn't recognize him. Peter, we know the story of how that he climbs out of the boat. Jesus calls him to himself, and Peter walks on water towards Jesus. We know the story again of how that we're told that he saw the wind. He saw the waves. The waves begin to swirl up around him. The wind begins to come against him. And we know the story of how that Peter begins to sink in the water. The reason being was that he took his eyes off Jesus. While his eyes were fixed and focused on Jesus, he was walking on the water. But then he turns his focus and his attention to the wind and to the waves. And the minute that he takes his eyes off Jesus, he begins to sink. You see, it's one thing to see him. It's another thing to recognize him. But it's an entirely different thing altogether to keep our focus on him. And that's what we're called to, church. To keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. To keep our focus on him. To see him, to recognize him, and to keep our eyes focused on him. In Revelation chapter 2, John is writing to the churches, and the first church that he writes to is the church in Ephesus. And he begins to begin the letter by the good things that they've done, but then it turns and it changes, and he says, Jesus' message to the church is, I've got this one thing against you. You have left your first love. Ephesians, you were doing brilliant. You were doing absolutely amazing, but you've left your first love. Christianity is all about one thing: falling in love with Jesus. Falling in love with Jesus. And Jesus writes to the church and says, you don't love me anymore. You've taken your focus away from me. You've taken your attention away from me. Can I tell you that the number one reason why people leave church, the number one reason why people walk away from God, the number one reason is that people lose their focus. They take their attention away from Jesus and they focus on the storm. They focus on the wind, on the waves, whatever it is. Or someone said something to me that I didn't like, so I'm not going back to that church. The pastor didn't greet me this morning, so I'm going to go to another church where the pastor cares about me and loves me. We leave church and we walk away from church because of whatever those other things are. And if you keep your focus on Jesus, Hebrews chapter 12 starts with, we know the hall of faith where the writer begins to talk about all of these great men and women of God. And then it goes on to talk about running your race, run with perseverance, to let all the sin that so easily entangles, to let that go. To take your focus off that there and to run with perseverance the race marked out with you. And then it goes on in verse 2 and it says, fixing your eyes on Jesus. Fixing your eyes on Jesus. Are your eyes fixed on other people? Are your eyes fixed on other things? Or are your eyes fixed and focused on Jesus? Do you see him? Do you recognize him? Are you focused and fixed on him? The Olympics are about to take place in a couple of weeks' time in Paris. And some of the races that I like to watch is the 100 meters. I love the 100 meters. I love the relay races because you're just waiting at that exchange of the baton from one runner to the other. Who's going to drop it? What's going to happen? Because all chaos and confusion can break out there and anything can happen. And I love the relay races. And in the 100-meter sprint, in the 100 meters in the hurdles, where they've just got that run, that straight run, you see them all lined up and they're getting ready and they're smacking their legs. And their eyes are focused on the finish line. That's all they're focused on. They tune out everything else. All they are looking at is the finish line. That's all they're focused on. They don't want to focus on the runner to the right of them. They don't want to focus on the runner to the left of them. They're focused on the finish line. Their eyes are fixed on the goal. Their eyes are fixed on the finish line. Your finish line is a person called Jesus. That's your finish line. The arms of Jesus. And I picture me running a race and Jesus is at the end. He's at the finish line with his arms wide open and he's waiting on me to finish my race. Paul said, I have finished the race. I've run the race. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. He ran into the arms of Jesus. Where are your eyes fixed today? Can you see him? Can you see Jesus? Can you see him? Do you recognize him? Are your eyes fixed on him? I think that sometimes we lose the beauty of God. Paula and Roy, they're away to Spain with the family. Lucy is away with them. Lucy sent a photograph into our group chat of the sunset in Spain. They're in Salou. And we've been there, and I know exactly what she's talking about, because we've seen the sunsets in Salou. And whenever you go to somewhere like Spain or the Mediterranean, anywhere but here, the sunsets are amazing. And she sends this photograph in of the sunset and saying, how can you not believe that there's a God? Whenever you see this sunset, and there's something that captivates us and captures our attention whenever we see the magnificence of a sunset. That's God. It reflects the beauty of God. And God is absolutely amazing. And we need to be recaptured and recaptivated again and again and again by who He is, by all of His beauty and splendor and magnificence. The God that you worship, the God that you serve, the God you come here to sing about is the most amazing God. He is absolutely incredible. John tries to kind of in some way capture, whenever he talks at the beginning of Revelation about Jesus, he hears Jesus, he hears words coming from behind him. He hears a voice, and it says that he turns to see who it is that's talking to him. And then he begins to try and describe Jesus in Revelation. And then there's Alistair Ritchie shared on a wondrous reading from Revelation about the splendor of heaven. And these men, John tries to put down in words, tries to in some way convey the wonder and magnificence of heaven and the wonder and magnificence and beauty of Jesus. May we never lose our wonder of Him. Can you see Him? Can you see Him in all of His glory, in all of His splendor, in all of His magnificence and goodness and love? Can you see Him? He is an amazing God. There are instances in the Bible, worship team, you can come. There are instances in the Bible where people fail to recognize God or to recognize the presence of God. It happens on so many occasions with the disciples. We've talked about them in the storm. And now that they thought Jesus was a ghost, they saw Him, but they failed to recognize Him. In Luke chapter 24, again, after the resurrection of Jesus, there's two disciples, not of the 12, but there's two of them, and they're on a road to Emmaus in chapter 24 of Luke. And it's the day, it's the Sunday. And they're talking with each other. They're trying to wrap their heads around what went on over the weekend. And we're told that Jesus comes and begins to walk alongside them. And He asked them about what they're talking about, and we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth. We thought He was the one. We thought He was the Messiah. We thought He was the one who would redeem Israel, who would bring us out of the oppression of the Romans. We thought He would do this. We thought He would do that. And He's dead, and we don't know what's going on. Have you not heard about this? And we're told that Jesus on the road to Emmaus begins to unpack the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures of what exactly was to happen to the Messiah, through the Messiah. And even then on the road to Emmaus, they still don't know who He is. And what happens is they come to Emmaus, and Jesus begins to walk on. And the two guys, the two disciples, are like, do you want to come and stay with us for the night? And Jesus agrees. They see Him, but they don't recognize Him. And they sit the home of wherever they are, and we're told that Jesus breaks bread. And in that moment of Jesus breaking bread, it says their eyes were opened. Open the eyes of my heart so that I will see you. Do you see Him? Luke chapter 9, the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John are up the mountain with Jesus. And this is the most remarkable thing, I think, that, in the midst and in a long list of remarkable things that Jesus does. To be one of the three, to be one of the 12, to be part of what happens here is absolutely incredible. And that Jesus is transfigured. He's lit up like the Ready Brek kid on the top of this mountain, and He's got Moses and Elijah from the Old Testament with him. And the disciples that are there, they fall asleep. And they could have missed it. And when we're told in Luke chapter 9 and verse 32, it says, Peter and his companions were very sleepy. But when they became fully awake, they saw the glory of the Lord. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord, so that I will see you. So that I will see your glory. So that I will see your face. Awaken our hearts to you. Open our eyes. Awaken our hearts. Genesis chapter 8, Jacob is leaving the house of his father, leaving the home that he's grown up in, and he's away. He's going back to where his father's come from, going to look for a wife. And we're told that he came to a certain place. When he came to that certain place, again, he goes to go asleep. He lays down a rock so he can put his head on that rock and go asleep. And we're told that in his sleep he had a dream, or he had a vision. And in this dream he sees a ladder coming down from heaven, and angels ascending and descending on this ladder. And he wakens from his sleep, and his response is, surely the Lord was in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. Awaken our hearts to you. Open the eyes of our hearts so that we would see you, Jesus. Let our hearts be awake. So we were singing before I took the platform, let our hearts be awake so that we would see Jesus. God is not absent from your troubles. He is with you in the midst of your trouble. Sometimes we just don't see him. Sometimes we see him, but we don't recognize him. This is what happened with Mary. She's in the garden. She goes to look for Jesus. She looks into the tomb. And the problem is with Mary is that she is so confounded, she is overwhelmed with chaos and confusion of the weekend's events. Because on the Thursday night they are gathered together, what we know as the Last Supper. Mary was probably part of the team that made the sandwiches for the Last Supper. She's probably part of the team that put all the food together. She's got to be there. And like everyone else that was gathered, they're thinking that life is going to go one way. We've done this before. We've done this a couple of times before with Jesus. And this is the way the weekend is going to go. And that night they go to the Garden of Gethsemane and everything takes a turn. They weren't expecting this. Gethsemane. Jesus is arrested. He's taken. And within 24 hours, Jesus is dead. He's dead. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go. Mary in her chaos and confusion is actually overwhelmed with grief. Grief equates to loss. Mary had lost someone special to her, had lost the one who had taken her out of the mess that she had made of her life, the mess that her life was. He had redeemed her. He had saved her from the darkness, the depression, everything that was on her, that was in her, the life that she was living. Jesus takes her out of that and saves her. And now the man that she was following, the man who saved her, was dead. She goes looking for him. And she's overwhelmed with grief, even to the point that whenever we're told that she's looking into the tomb and there's two angels there, one at the feet, one at the head. It doesn't even seem to be that she's taken aback by the fact that there's two angels in the tomb. So overwhelmed with grief. Grief equates to loss. Doesn't even have to necessarily be someone who has passed away. Very often that's what it is. There are people in here and you have suffered the greatest loss ever imaginable. People that belong to this church that have lost children. People that have lost parents before their time. Overwhelmed with grief. And in the midst of your grief, chaos and confusion, can you see him? Can you see Jesus? Can you see Jesus? Mary's focus became the empty tomb. Mary's focus became the hurt, the pain, the grief, and the sorrow. So overwhelmed with grief was Mary that she failed to recognize Jesus. He was there. He was standing right in front of her. She saw him, but she didn't recognize him. There was one moment that changed Mary. There was one moment where her eyes were opened and she went from seeing Jesus to recognizing Jesus. And it was one word. It was her name. Because Mary thinks she's talking to the gardener. Sir, if you've taken him away, can you tell me where he is? I'll go and get him myself. Jesus looks at her. And with one word, Mary, her eyes are opened. And she sees Jesus. She sees Jesus. And I really just want to say that he is standing right in front of you right now. Standing right in front of you. Stephen. He's calling you. Standing right in front of you. Sylvia. He knows your name. Elizabeth. Debbie. Because it's not just, can we see him? He sees you. He saw the disciples struggling in the storm. And he goes to them. He saw Mary overwhelmed with grief. And I love how that Jesus is so personal. That he knows not just what you're going through. He knows your name. And he will go to you. He will stand in front of you and he calls your name. Do you see him? Can you see Jesus? Will you close your eyes for me, please? Lord, we just want to thank you that you never leave us. You never leave us. You are with us always. We may not feel your presence, but may faith rise above feelings. May faith rise above feelings. Help us to see you. Help us know and understand You are right in front of us, and you call us by name. Help us see you. Jesus. Jesus. While your eyes are closed, can you see him? Can you see him right in front of you? With his arms wide open. Can you see Jesus? I see him. Arms wide open, with the biggest smile on his face as we run to him. Keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. You stand to your feet with me, please, if you're able to. Just while every head is bowed, every eye is closed, we're about to finish in worship. And as we continue to worship, the prayer team will be to my left, to your right. If you need prayer, then you go and you see our prayer team and allow them to pray with you and to pray over you. But in this last moment, maybe you're in this place and you've never had a relationship with Jesus. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to him, to give your life to Jesus. And if that's you, then you do me a very simple favor and just pray a very simple prayer with me. And then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Every head will be bowed, every eye will be closed. This is just between you, me, and God. So if that's you today and you're saying yes to Jesus, then you pray this prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for dying for me. Thank you that you gave your life for me. Help me to see you. Come and fill me with your Holy Spirit. Fill my heart with all that you are, so that I can see you. That from this day on, I will live my life for you, keeping my eyes fixed and focused on you, Jesus.